Our today's discussion on subtle elements, Sukshma Prapancha. The first element to evolve is Akash, according to Upanishad. Akasha, which is called as sky or space in English, poorly literate translation, because space or sky means something else above, space means space. But in Sanskrit, Akasha means asamantat kashate iti akasha, which accommodates all, everything is called akasha. This is the actual meaning of akasha, but poorly translated in English as sky or space. So that akasha, which is usually translated as ether also in previous days, the creation or evolution of akasha really meant that Brahman associated with Maya appears as akasha. So this is the first product of the unholy wedlock of Brahman and Maya. First child. So it appears as Akasha. It is a well-known fact that the physical world is characterized by grossness, heaviness, and inertness. Sthulatva, Gurutva, and Jadatva. Hence, the Vedantists include that at the time of the evolution of Akasha, which is the material out of which the subsequent elements are created, Prakriti or nature has a preponderance of tamas. But please note it, tamas doesn't mean tamaguna. Okay, tamas is something different, I'm telling. So Prakriti has a preponderance of tamas, whose chief characteristics are inertness, heaviness, and grossness. Akasha is the intangible material substance that pervades the whole universe. From Akasha evolves Vayu. Upanishad mantra is there. Akashat Vayuhu Vayor Agnihi. Agnir Apoh Arapo Advyaf Prithvi. So from Akasha evolves air or vayu. That is to say, Brahman associated with Maya appearing as Akasha. It's not actual creation. Appearing as Akasha further appears as air. From air evolves fire or Agni. From fire, water up, and from water, our earth evolves or appears as Prithvi or earth. The principle of illusory superimposition, or this is called Vivartavad, illusory superimposition, must be applied in the evolution of each element. That is to say, Brahman associated with Maya appears as each of the five elements, and during the process of evolution, there takes place no change in Brahman. Clear? As Akasha is prior to air, at the time of evolution, it is figuratively called the cause of the later. Sattva, Raja, Rajas, and Tamas, which constitute Prakriti or nature, are transmitted at the time of creation to the five elements in accordance with the law that the attributes of the cause determine those of the effect. Previously, we have discussed that Upanishad's main objective was not to reach or to justify how the universe, superimposed universe, is true. सृष्टि तत्व उपनिषद का लक्ष्य नहीं. The main theme of each and every Upanishad is to prove the communion of individual soul or Jivatma and the Absolute, the Paramatma. Tattvamasi is the aim of all Upanishads. Brahman is the only goal of human life, not only that of Upanishad also. Upanishad doesn't believe that Srishti or the creation actually happened. According to the Vedic thought process, it is an appearance. It is an illusory superimposition. So, in different Upanishad or place, we saw different creation theory and then negation of it. Like in Chandogya, we saw Trivid Karanam. There are only three basic elements Chandogya has stated. So the thing is, the five elements here thus evolved are subtle, rudimentary. I will come to the translation of this word. Rudimentary means tanmatra and unmixed, apanchikrita. They are called subtle or sukshma because at the time of evolution they are unable to participate in any action, rudimentary or tanmatra, because each at that time possesses its own trait alone. Sattva remains as sattva, rajas remains as rajas, tamas remains as tamas, and apanchikrita, no mixing up. So, an unmixed, apanchikrita, because they are not yet mixed with one another, out of these subtle elements are produced the subtle bodies and the gross elements. From the gross elements, as will afterwards be seen or we will discuss, is produced the gross universe. From the standpoint of sense perception, Indriya Gochara, there are only 5 elementary objects in the universe, namely Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, and Gandha. Sound, touch, form, taste, and smell. That is why Vedanta speaks of 5 elements only. The unique characteristic of subtle akasha uh, is sound, of subtle air touch, of subtle fire form, of subtle water taste, and of subtle earth smell. These traits cannot be grasped by the senses because they are in the tanmatra avastha. They are in the rudimentary state. These are not grasped by the senses. Now we come to subtle bodies. Out of the subtle elements are formed the subtle bodies of living creatures. The subtle body which accompanies the soul after death consists of 17 parts. Consists of 17 parts, namely the 5 organs of perception. What are they? Chakshu, Karna, Nasika, Jihva, Tvak. Eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and the skin. The 5 organs of action, Vak, Pani, Pad, Payu, Upastha. Organ of speech, the hands, the legs, organ of moving, Payu, the organ of excretion, and Upastha means genitals or the organ of happiness. So we saw so 5 organs of perception is the hearing, touching, seeing, tasting, and smelling. I will come. So 5 Jnanendriya or organs of perception, 5 Karmendriya or organs of action, then Pancha Pranas, 5 pranas or the vital air forces. Who are they? Pran, Apana, Vyana, Udana, Samana. And who are they actually? Then you have to go back to the class definitions of Vedanta. There we have discussed about each event or each matter elaborately. The manas and the buddhi, mind and intellect. So 17 are 5 karmendriya, 5 jnanendriya, 5 pranas, mind and intellect. Some philosophers says 19. They include mana, buddhi, chitta, ahankara. Okay. So mind, intellect, memory and ego. Some philosophers says 24 tattva, 24 elements. Today we will not go into that. If you are very interested, please go back to definitions of Vedanta class. There I have discussed all of them very elaborately. The 5 organs of perception, those of hearing, touching, seeing, tasting and smelling, are produced respectively from the sattva elements of akasha, means from the sattva element of akasha, hearing ability are produced. From the sattva element of air, touching are produced, touching ability are produced. From the sattva element of fire, the seeing ability is produced. From sattva element of water, tasting ability are produced. And from the sattva of earth, sattva element of earth, the smelling ability is produced. By an organ is meant not the outer instrument, but something subtle made of finer matter which functions through the physical instruments. So those eyes are not talk of over here. These are the physical gross element, gross organ. What we are discussing now, the subtle ability which expresses through the gross organs. Okay? Thus, the organ of seeing does not mean the outer eyes, but an organ made of intangible fine matter, which is one of the constituents of the subtle body. And it is applicable for all senses of perception, all jnanendriya. The mind or manas is that function of the inner organ, or inner organ means antahkarana. Antahkarana. which considers the pros and cons of the situation. The buddhi, the intellect or determinative faculty, is a second function of the same organ by which doubt is resolved and one comes to a conclusion regarding the real nature of an object. There are two other functions of the inner organ, namely the chitta, which seeks for pleasurable objects, and ahankara or I consciousness, small I consciousness, ego, you can tell, which identifies the self with the body. Sometimes these functions are loosely described as the manas or mind. Okay. So in the mind, manas means antakarana. The same mind is divided into four parts: man, buddhi, chitta, ahankara. Okay. Uh, yes. According to Vedanta, the mind is material in nature, jada, inert in nature, because it is produced from the five material elements: prakriti or primordial matter includes everything. So the thing is, what I told, according to Vedanta, the mind is material in nature because it is produced from the five material elements. So Prakriti or primordial matter includes everything: organic, inorganic, and psychic. Brahman or consciousness, which is self-luminous, is utterly different from it. The five organs of perception and the inner organ are said to be composed of the sattva particles of the five elements because they are endowed with luminosity. That is to say, they are capable of illumining or expressing an object. Is it clear to you? Again, I'm telling, Brahman or consciousness, which is self-illuminous, self-illuminous and self-effulgent, satasiddha, swaprakasa, is utterly different from it. The five organs of perception or jnanendriya and the inner organ or antakarana are said to be composed of sattva particle of the five elements. Okay? Sattva particles of five elements because they are endowed with luminosity. That is so, they are capable of illumining or expressing an object. Like bulb or tube light, they are not self-effulgent. When the the electricity is expressed or connected, it shows as if it is lighting by its own, but we know it is not. But it must be remembered that this luminosity of manas, mind, buddhi, intellect, chitta, memory, and ahankara, or the small individuality, is derived from the self-luminous Atma. They themselves being material and therefore non-luminous by nature. Hari Om Tat Sat.